part two. You just watched the video about sensory overload. I'm sure you made some connections in that video about what you saw and heard and how that connects to the brain composition, whether it is the memory and the retrieval or the increase in neurons that cause the increase of rapid firing and communication between the neuron cells in the brain that cause that overstimulation. We're now going to take our brain development and our sensory processing and we're going to apply that to student behavior. Think about that student again that you thought about first thing this morning or this afternoon about the student that was struggling with the behavior. Was their behavior a tantrum or a meltdown? Oftentimes, we see behavior generally described as a tantrum. In a tantrum means the behavior is controlled and purposeful. The individual may appear frustrated and self aware of himself or herself, aware of the surroundings, aware of others around them, aware of the impact of their behavior. The acting out individual may also seem irrational or misunderstood. The behaviors may be exhausting to the individual or to others around them. That could be to the other students that may be involved, or it could be to the other staff members that are interacting with that student. Most often, the behaviors occur because of a lack of skills in processing, a lack of skills in social cues, a lack of skills in understanding or executive functioning. Tantrums happen. However, I want to challenge you to think of that same behavior in a different light. Could that same behavior be occurring because of a sensory meltdown, a communication meltdown, a processing meltdown? Meltdowns look a little bit different. They look dysregulated and emotional. The individual looks overwhelmed, kind of unaware of what is happening, loss of control. They also could look irrational, misunderstood, exhausting, or lack of a skill. So, how do we know the difference between that tantrum and the meltdown? Well, that connects back to what we learned about the brain composition and the sensory processing. I would say most often students have and show behaviors because of a meltdown instead of a tantrum. If we view the behavior being rooted as a meltdown, we should support that student through the struggle instead of expecting him or her to just turn off those behaviors and comply with whatever it was that we were asking them to do or that they were expected to do in their routine. Support looks different than expectation. Let's think about where the behaviors truly come from in order to prevent or respond to them effectively. First thing that we can do is look at how we can be preventative to prevent the behaviors from ever occurring in the first place. The first thing we can do is look at the classroom environment. We want it clutter free. Materials can be visible, they're labeled. That's a communication tool for many. Storage areas are covered by doors or curtains. This could prevent distractions or student interest. Preferred tasks, such as those preferred items like the iPads, computers, games, or toys, if it's too perseveratory, they should be out of sight until it's time to use them. The area should be calm and quiet. There should be designated areas for specific tasks, such as your desks and your seat work, maybe a work table or a group table, a movement area, a calm down area. a computer station. Visuals are very important to use with students with communication disorders, sensory processing disorders, autism spectrum disorders, and just any student in general can benefit from visuals. Visuals include things such as schedules, task lists, picture cues or prompts, visuals to support text, visuals for behavioral expectations. A visual does not always have to be with a picture. Sometimes that task list could be just writing. Maybe the older students would benefit from a written task list, and maybe the younger students would benefit from a picture task list. I think of myself in this area. I in social media, I am much more drawn to research or information articles when there are visuals to partner with it. My understanding greatens and enhances when there is a visual to partner with the written context or the verbal context that is presented. The visuals do not have to be reactive. So, for example, you don't have to wait to show the child sit when you want him to sit. Maybe that cue is placed on his desk all the time so he knows when he comes to his desk, he is expected to sit at the chair. Another way to prevent some of the sensory meltdowns or behaviors from occurring is using a token board and first then language. Use positive reinforcement for the desired behaviors. You're not going to select every behavior to positively reinforce, but the targeted desired behaviors. For example, maybe just one, the single behavior of focus. That's the one that is most impacting. Sometimes students with IEPs or behavior intervention plans have those behaviors already outlined for you. Use that reinforcement system consistently. You want to be predictable and, yes, reinforcing with the reinforcement system. They should know what they are doing and what they are getting when they do that behavior. The reinforcement does not have to be big reinforcers, such as if they sit in their chair, they get 10 minutes of computer time. Sometimes it's just a verbal reinforcement or nonverbal gesture that is reinforcing to the student. In any event, we want the student to be successful. We want the student to feel successful. This will increase the likelihood that the behavior will continue. Choose your reinforcers wisely. Make sure that they are readily available for the student and they are motivating to the student. If it's not motivating to the student and it's not promoting the behavior to continue, it is not a reinforcer. Next, be the model student yourself. Monitor your volume, your engagement, your communication system, your expression of feelings, your expected behaviors, and your body language for what you want the students to be doing. If you are expecting them to be engaged in small group instruction, you should be engaged in small group instruction. If you're expecting them to use a calm volume, you should use a calm volume. You can use the same visuals and use the same cues for yourself and your colleagues that you do with the students. Or you're probably thinking right about now, I did all of that, but the behavior still happened. You're probably right. You probably do have a lot of those tools in place. And yes, behaviors still do happen. So now it comes to the point where we have to respond to those behaviors. We have to give some kind of a reaction to the behavior. Do we respond or do we react? Yes, student behaviors can be pretty intense. Sometimes they're loud, sometimes they're flailing, sometimes they could be violent or acting out. That can be a little scary. We have to monitor ourselves in those situations. Think about our first responders. If an emergency is happening, think about how the first responders appear on scene. Generally, they're not running, they're not rushing, they're not screaming, they're not yelling. They come in control of themselves. They do that so that they can be available to help others. If they run to the scene and they're rushing, they're out of breath, they're unavailable, they have to regulate themselves before they can interact. Just like first responders, we want to be responsive and not reactive when a student is having a behavioral struggle. So, how do we do that? We respond, don't react, by don't take it personally. Chances are it has nothing to do with you. If it does have something to do with you, or you're feeling like, yeah, this may be a personal attack, this is a good time to switch out with a colleague. Just let them know that you need to take a break and you need to do something else for a minute so that it doesn't feel so personal. Monitor your own emotions. Monitor where you are in that situation. Use some of those self regulation or coping strategies that we're expecting students to use for yourself. You can even tell the student, I need a minute to breathe, or I'm going to go get a drink of water. I'll be right back. In order to respond and not react, you need to think about the brain composition, and you need to think about the overstimulation, and you need to think about what the possible trigger or cause for that behavior was. In order to address the behavior, you have to know where it came from. Sometimes our students don't have the language to tell us what happened, how they're feeling, what they should be doing, but yet we expect them to do that. We need to use our senses to interpret the meltdown. Remove the audience. That's other students or other staff members. Remove the overstimulation. Even change locations if you have to. So if the student is in the classroom and it is too loud in that classroom, go for a walk in the hallway. If the student's in the hallway, enter a classroom. Know your student. Specifically, know your student's comfort level with proximity. That means how close we are to them. Some students like closeness. However, in a moment of distress, it may not be safe for the student and the staff to be so close together. Their bubble may be a little bit bigger during that time. Listen to the students. Sometimes they'll tell you if you're too close or they want you closer. Use positive language. This takes a conscious effort. We often want to tell the student to stop yelling, stop throwing things, sit down. However, we want to be supportive and positive, also limiting the verbals we're engaging with them at the time. So, for example, we may say, calm voice, I'm listening. You seem upset. We can wait. Support the emotion instead of trying to stop it. Have you ever had somebody tell you when you were angry, oh, don't be angry, or stop crying? It's not quite that easy as a switch, is it? Sometimes it takes a little while to work through the emotion instead of just turning it off. You can support the emotion by providing comfort, safety, security, communication, and language. Sometimes limiting the verbal engagement is necessary, though. In a meltdown, the student may not be hearing you. So, think about that student again that had that behavioral meltdown that we thought about at the beginning. Think about where that behavior came from in a different light. Was it really a purposeful intentional acting out behavior? Or could have it been caused by differences in brain composition or a sensory processing misunderstanding? Could it really be a meltdown? If it really is a meltdown, we should be more supportive. Would you do something different in that same situation with that student if you had the opportunity to do it again? What would you do differently? That concludes our professional learning session for today. Hopefully, you've gained a lot of insight into your students' behaviors, as well as some strategies to prevent behaviors, as well as how to respond instead of react to behaviors. Stay tuned for more professional learning sessions. Thanks a lot.